taking a pause, Susan found herself standing before imposing iron gates, their height dwarfing her. She let out a weary sigh, realizing this was her final hope, the last address on her list. The thought of rejection filled her with dread, leaving her heart heavy in her chest. She was on the edge of her resilience, fatigue and desperation washing over her like a relentless tide. Taking a job was becoming a matter of survival for her. The clock was ticking. And if she didn't find employment soon, her only option would be to resort to borrowing money. The mere thought of it made her stomach churn, but even then, she struggled to think of anyone who could lend her the financial support she needed. Her mind was a blank canvas, devoid of any names or faces that potentially offer help in this trying time. Summoning her remaining courage, Susan reached out to press the doorbell button, simultaneously pulling up her hoodie in an attempt to shield herself from the world. To her surprise, the gates began to creak open, initiating movement without a single word exchanged or question asked about her intent. As the towering iron gates gradually parted, they revealed the stern face of a man cloaked in the solemnity of a suit. His features were weathered with a gloominess that seemed to match Susan's own desolation. The closer look confirmed her suspicion. He was a security guard. His presence, though initially startling, was part of the intimidating exterior of this final address on her list. With a gruff voice, the man asked, "What do you want?" Summoning a small nervous smile, Susan replied, "I'm here regarding the job advertisement for the housemaid position. Is this the correct address?" Without saying anything, the man turned away, muttering something into his walkie-talkie. After a moment, he swiveled back towards her, his stern features softening slightly. "Please come in. I'll lead the way," he said, gesturing towards the open gates. Stepping past the threshold, Susan found herself in a vast and elegant yard. She could sense the grandeur surrounding her, but out of respect, she refrained from openly admiring the decor. Instead, she kept her head low, her gaze fixed on the ground. Once the gates had rumbled shut, the man started walking, and Susan trailed behind him, maintaining a respectful distance. Despite the opulence around her, Susan's anxiety kept her focused on the task at hand, securing the job. "Mr. Baker, the young lady is here for the housemaid position," the security guard announced, indicating Susan. The house owner, a man with a crown of gray hair, glanced up from his pile of papers. "Thanks, Brian." With a nod, the guard left the room, leaving Susan alone with Mr. Baker. Slowly, she removed her hood, revealing her face fully to the house owner. His relatively youthful appearance sparked a pang of disappointment within her. He wasn't very old, so it was likely she would face rejection here as well. Her belief was based on her experience. Younger homeowners typically favored more mature housemates, which could explain her previous rejections. As Mr. Baker's eyebrows arched in surprise, Susan sighed, a sound laced with deep-rooted despair. "I apologize for my surprise," Mr. Baker began, "but are you certain you want to work as a housemate? You don't strike me as someone who fits this role. Pretty girls like you are usually seen in high heels strutting down catwalks, not scrubbing floors." "Yes, I am certain about my decision to work as a housemate. My appearance doesn't define my work capabilities. Besides, I'm over 40 now, so the catwalk isn't really an option for me," Susan defended her position. Andrew contemplated her words, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the table before finally responding. "Well, all right, please take a seat." With cautious grace, Susan lowered herself into the offered chair. Andrew scrutinized her, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "So, I'm guessing you don't have much experience in this line of work, do you?" Admitting the truth, Susan nodded. "Yes, this would be my first job as a housemate, but I assure you I'm a quick learner." Andrew looked at her seemingly puzzled. "I don't doubt that, considering your educational background, but I can't help but ask. You're attractive, well-educated. Why do you want to work as a housemate?" At this question, a bright smirk spread across Susan's face. She felt she had nothing left to lose. After all, this was her last resort. "You're right. Once upon a time, my life looked completely different. I had a loving husband, a fulfilling job, a car, and a place I proudly called home. But what I didn't know was that my husband had a hidden vice. He was a compulsive gambler. His dangerous addiction led to his murder. And soon after, the people he owed large sums of money to came knocking on my door. In an attempt to pay off his debts, I sold everything, the apartment, the cars. But when I reached out to friends and colleagues for support, I found myself alone. Everyone turned their backs on me. Susan paused for a moment to gather her thoughts before she continued. I came to understand that the world I thought I knew was nothing more than an illusion. The truth of life is something else entirely. This realization served as a sort of system reboot for me. Now I see no purpose in chasing after lofty aspirations. My focus is simple: earn my keep, ensure I have food on the table. That's all that matters to me now. That's quite an uncommon tale, Andrew commented, his brow creased in thought. Could it be depression? I assure you I'm not depressed, Susan responded, her tone resolute. Do you think I didn't try to find a job fitting my qualifications? My specialty is very niche, but my personal history always seems to overshadow my capabilities. It's frustrating when people express sympathy yet offer no tangible help. I know you probably won't hire me either, but at least venting has made me feel a bit lighter. With that, Susan rose from her seat. Ready to make her exit. As she made her way towards the door, Andrew's voice echoed. Wait, she halted mid-stripe, turning around in surprise. You're hired, he declared, causing Susan's eyes to widen in disbelief. I do have one more question, though. Was this your first attempt at applying? No, Susan replied, a hint of relief seeping into her voice. Your house was the last on my list. Why didn't the others hire you? Andrew asked, curious. With a shrug, Susan simply said, the wise were against it. At her response, Andrew let out a hearty laugh. I should have guessed. Well, welcome aboard. My wife passed away 11 years ago. You won't have to worry about any objections here. Susan found herself acclimating quite well to her new environment, largely due to the homeowner's assistance. Andrew was always patient, taking the time to demonstrate how various tasks should be performed. For some reason, he seemed to apologize frequently, which Susan found oddly comforting, a testament to his kind and understanding nature. We had an elderly lady working here before you, Andrew confessed one day. She was the only housemaid we've ever had. 2 months ago, she decided to retire for good, planning to spend her time with her grandchildren. I tried my best to keep the house clean and even cooked meals. I'm used to cleanliness, but it turned out to be a more challenging task than I anticipated. At his earnest admission, Susan couldn't help but burst into laughter. It's not as difficult as you might think, she reassured him. The key is understanding your responsibilities and ensuring tasks are completed on time, just like any other job, really. Despite her initial optimism, Susan quickly realized that her job wasn't going to be easy. The house required a significant amount of work. Though not immediately noticeable, a layer of dust had settled everywhere, indicating that the house hadn't been cleaned thoroughly for quite some time. And the kitchen, she discovered, was a completely different challenge altogether. The state of disarray spoke volumes about the daunting tasks that lay ahead for her. One evening, after they had finished dinner, Andrew insisted she share with them whenever they didn't have guests. He made an unexpected proposition. Susan, the weather outside is quite lovely, he began, his voice tentative. I hope I'm not overstepping, but would you be open to sharing a glass of fine wine with me? I've forgotten how good fine wine even tastes, Susan confessed. As they settled into the rocking chairs, they engaged in a relaxed conversation. Andrew broke the silence. I have a daughter. She lives in Portugal. She initially went there for her studies but decided to stay on. Now I just send her money every month. As he shared this, Andrew covered his face with his palms, letting out a deep, sorrowful sigh. The serene atmosphere was momentarily tinged with a sense of melancholy. Recently, I've been acting more like an automated teller than a father, Andrew admitted, his voice filled with regret. We've lost her connection. She only calls when she needs more money, and I only call her to confirm that she has received it. Intrigued, Susan asked, does she ever visit you? In the past 4 years, she's only been here twice, Andrew confessed. Have you tried inviting her over? Susan suggested. No strings attached. Just ask her to come home and spend some time with you. Andrew looked at her, contemplating. Do you think you would make a difference? Honestly, you never know until you try, Susan replied encouragingly. Andrew spent the next week mulling over Susan's suggestion. weighing its potential and considering the implications. Every evening, Andrew and Susan found themselves seated on the patio, engaging in deep conversations. Andrew only broached the topic of Susan's past once, respecting her privacy and demonstrating a sensitivity towards her difficult history. "You know what, Susan? I genuinely appreciate you," Andrew said one evening, his tone sincere. "Both as a person and as a housemaid, there's a certain warmth that you exude. Since you started working here, this house has begun to feel more like a home. I want you to take your time here to heal, to regain your strength, but eventually, I believe you should reclaim your life. A vibrant woman like you shouldn't be lost to the world. Don't misunderstand me. I'll support you in every way I can." Susan offered him a melancholy smile. "I don't even know what to say, Mr. Baker. The thought of returning to a normal life isn't something I'm ready to consider just yet." No. Take your time," he hastened to reassure her. "I didn't mean to rush you. If it were up to me, I'd be delighted to have you continue to care for my house and stay here for as long as you need." Susan laughed, her spirits visibly lightening. "Honestly, I never thought we'd have this conversation. I must apologize, but when we first met, you seemed quite intimidating." Andrew responded with a chuckle. "Well, as they say, never judge a book by its cover." In that moment, Andrew's gaze lingered on Susan a bit longer than usual, causing her to blush. Realizing his unintentional effect, he quickly diverted the conversation. "I completely forgot to mention that I followed your advice. My daughter is arriving tomorrow. Can you believe it?" Although she took some time to respond, she called back within 10 minutes and confirmed that she'll come. "And here's a surprise. She's bringing a friend along. I'm guessing it's her boyfriend, or maybe even her fiancé. That's wonderful news. We should prepare something special to welcome them," Susan suggested, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. Seeing her excitement, Andrew couldn't help but chuckle. "All right, Susan, I don't want to keep you up too late tonight. I can see how your eyes lit up at the idea of preparations, and you've completely forgotten about our conversation. You should go ahead and get some rest." Sandra arrived in grand style, making quite the entrance. She swept into the house, suitcases bursting with stylish clothes and extravagant dresses. Just in the latest couture, she was adorned with an array of sparkling jewelry, a walking testament to a life of luxury. When Susan heard the commotion from the kitchen, she knew the guests had arrived. Rather than rushing out to greet them, she focused her energy on setting the table meticulously, determined to prepare a delicious meal for Andrew's daughter. Though she hadn't met her yet, Susan held a deep respect for Andrew, and this respect extended to his family due to the kind and considered way he had treated her. Half an hour later, all the guests were settled comfortably in the grand dining room. The room was filled with the comforting aroma of a home-cooked meal and the sound of gentle conversation. The table was beautifully set, the gleaming cutlery arranged with precision beside the fine china plates. With a sense of purpose and a warm smile, Susan moved effortlessly around the table. She carried the large bowl, filled to the brim with spaghetti, entwined around juicy homemade meatballs. As she served each guest, her movements were a seamless dance of hospitality. Andrew took his first bite and was instantly taken aback by the incredible flavor. He was no stranger to good food, but the meal Susan had prepared was truly exceptional. It was a beautiful blend of flavors, perfectly seasoned and expertly cooked. He could hardly contain his delight as he savored every bite, each one a testament to Susan's culinary prowess. Sandra, however, was a different story. Despite the delectable flavors of the meal, she made no overt show of appreciation. She maintained a neutral expression, her face revealing little of what she thought about the food. Her demeanor was controlled, offering no clue to the others about her feelings towards the meal. Sandra, much like her father, was a person of substantial presence. Her physical stature was striking, and she carried herself with a certain confidence that was reminiscent of Andrew. Moreover, there were many traits she shared with her father, from the way she held herself to certain mannerisms and expressions. It was clear that despite the distance between them, father and daughter shared a strong familial resemblance. The man accompanying Sandra presented a stark contrast to her youthful exuberance. He had a pointed nose and a demeanor that suggested a certain world weariness. His features and aura hinted at an age difference of at least 15 years between him and Sandra. He held a maturity and experience that stood out next to Sandra's youthful energy. Andrew's gaze rested on the man, his expression revealing a hint of surprise and puzzlement. The age difference and his daughter's choice of companion seemed to take him aback. Regardless, he made an effort to mask his astonishment and welcomed the man with a polite, albeit slightly strained smile. "So, Stefan, what line of work are you in?" Andrew inquired, addressing Sandra's companion directly. Not off guard by her father's straightforward question, Sandra intervened. "Dad, perhaps you could first ask him about the flight or his impressions of our country. Why the rush to know about his profession?" Her tone hinted at her discomfort with the directness of Andrew's query, indicating a desire for a more gradual and less intrusive line of questioning. Stefan took a moment to finish chewing his food, allowing a calm smile to grace his face. "That's all right, my dear. Let me answer your father," he said, the tone composed. Taking a sip of wine to gather his thoughts, Stefan paused briefly before speaking, his voice measured and confident. He chose his words carefully, mindful of the importance of the moment. "I work as a talent manager," Stefan began, his voice steady. "My job revolves around collaborating with models, actors, singers, and various other creative individuals. Essentially, I specialize in connecting the right people together, leveraging my network to foster opportunities and collaborations." Andrew listened attentively, his response limited to a nod of acknowledgement. His silence indicated that he was absorbing the information, though his thoughts remained concealed. "So, how did the two of you meet?" Andrew inquired, his curiosity piqued. Sandra and Stefan exchanged a brief glance, their hesitation evident. Sensing their discomfort, Sandra swiftly interjected. "We actually met at an art exhibition, Dad." Andrew picked up on the subtle cues, realizing that discussing the details of their relationship was making them uneasy. Understanding their unspoken boundaries, he decided to shift the conversation to a different topic, respecting their privacy. As Susan quietly attended to her duties, moving gracefully around the dining room and clearing empty plates, she couldn't help but sense Stefan's lingering gaze upon her. The intensity of his gaze didn't go unnoticed, and Sandra, too, began to notice the subtle glances exchanged between Stefan and Susan. After Susan excused herself from the dining room and retreated to the kitchen, Sandra seized the opportunity to address the situation. Sandra's curiosity got the best of her, and she directed her question to her father. "Dad, who is that lady? Is she your new servant?" Andrew shook his head gently. "No, Sandra, she's not a servant. Susan is more like an assistant who helps me with household chores and manages the day-to-day tasks." Just as Susan re-entered the room carrying a delectable dessert, Andrew took the opportunity to introduce her to the guests. His voice carried a touch of pride as he said, "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Susan. She possesses both skillful fingers and a bright mind, making her an invaluable member of our household." Andrew beamed at Susan, expressing his appreciation for her presence. Sandra's smirk widened as she continued to make her pointed remarks. If she is truly so skillful and bright, why is she serving tables instead of being at home with her husband and family? Or perhaps she is attempting to become a part of our family. Her words dripped with condescension and skepticism. Andrew, maintaining his composure, calmly wiped his mouth with a napkin and took a deliberate moment to finish chewing. It was evident that he was making a conscious effort to restrain himself from responding harshly to Sandra's comments. With a composed tone, he finally spoke, directing his words to his daughter. "Sandra, it's important to show some manners and respect for others." His voice carried a quiet authority, and he chose not to single out anyone in particular. Feeling the tension escalate, Susan instinctively retreated to the safety of the kitchen, seeking solace in the familiarity of her tasks. From a distance, she observed a dissatisfied expression on Sandra's face as she glared at her boyfriend. Sandra addressed him sharply. "And you, what are you drooling at?" In response, the guy mumbled something inaudible, his discomfort apparent. He abruptly rose from the table and made a swift exit from the room. Sandra hurried after him, calling out, Stefan, wait!" Their voices drifted into the distance as they engaged in a heated argument. Minutes later, the intensity of their voices subsided, replaced by a quieted tone. The kitchen stood silent, leaving Susan with her thoughts as she continued to attend to her duties, uncertain about the unfolding dynamics between Sandra and Stefan. Andrew's gaze turned towards Susan, a hint of concern in his eyes. "I apologize for her behavior. I don't know what's come over her. She wasn't like this before," Susan responded, her voice carrying understanding. "Well, when a woman is feeling jealous, it can bring out emotions and reactions that may seem out of character. I can understand it." Andrew's brow furrowed with confusion. "Jealous? Do you think she's jealous of Stefan?" Susan nodded gently. "It seems evident to me that she has developed feelings for him and perhaps cares more deeply than he does." Andrew sighed, contemplating the complexity of the situation. After clearing the table, doing the dishes, and completing her tasks, Susan took a moment for herself. She prepared a hot cup of tea and ventured out to the peaceful solitude of the patio. Susan recognized that with Sandra's presence, her opportunities for meaningful conversation with Andrew would be limited. Rather than dwelling on it, she chose to embrace the moment of solitude and find solace in the serene surroundings. As Susan prepared to leave the patio, cup in hand and blanket draped over her arm, she hesitated upon hearing her name being mentioned in the conversation between Andrew and Sandra. "Dad, get rid of her immediately." Susan's heart sank as she overheard Sandra's demanding and harsh words. She could sense the tension in the air and the gravity of the situation unfolding inside the study. Andrew's voice, tinged with confusion and concern, responded, "Sandra, sweetheart, what are you talking about? Why do you want me to fire her?" Sandra's tone grew more insistent, laced with frustration. "I said fire her now. I don't want her around here anymore." Susan's grip tightened on her cup, her mind racing with a mix of emotions. She hadn't anticipated such animosity from Sandra, and the abrupt demand left her feeling vulnerable and uncertain about her place in the household. Andrew's silence was palpable, a tangible weight hanging in the air as he processed Sandra's demand. He approached the chair, slowly lowering himself into it and taking a deep breath to collect his thoughts. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. "Well, first of all, I need to understand why you want her to leave. And secondly, since when are you telling me what to do?" His words carried a sense of authority, a gentle reminder that he was the one who held the final say in matters concerning the household. Andrew's tone was not confrontational, but rather conveyed a desire for understanding and open dialogue. Hoping to reach a resolution that would satisfy both parties involved. "Dad, didn't you see what happened? Do you really think some servant's life is more important than your daughter's happiness?" Andrew's smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression as he contemplated Sandra's words. After a brief pause, he responded, his voice calm but firm, "What does Susan have to do with your happiness?" Sandra let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh my God, Dad! Didn't you notice how Stefan is looking at her?" Andrew maintained his composure, taking a moment to collect his thoughts before replying. "If Stefan's attention is on Susan, then he's not truly devoted to you. A man who genuinely loves his partner won't seek out the company or attention of other women. And besides, couldn't you have found someone younger and more suitable for you?" His words carried a hint of both concern and fatherly guidance, aiming to offer perspective and remind Sandra of her own worth. Andrew was determined to protect his daughter's happiness, even if it meant addressing uncomfortable truths. Andrew's accusations grew more intense, her frustration evident as she continued to confront her father. "How can you defend her like that, Dad? Your assistant is purposely flirting with him." Andrew's patience began to wear thin as he thought to address the situation. "All right, enough with the servant label, Sandra." Sandra persisted, insisting she knew Susan's intentions. "I can't even see what she's thinking. If she can't have you, she'll settle for Stefan." Andrew's voice held a tone of exasperation as he responded, "Sandra, stop this nonsense. It's baseless." Sandra, undeterred, pressed her demand once again. "So, are you going to fire her or not?" Andrew's reply was resolute. "No, I'm not going to fire her. If Stefan can't remain faithful, then perhaps you need to reflect on whether you truly want someone like that." Sandra's tone softened, revealing her underlying motives. "Dad, you don't understand. Stefan is not just someone I love. He's helping me achieve what I want in Portugal. I don't want to come back to this country. I'm sick of it." Andrew's wariness was evident in his response. "Sandra, that's enough. It's time for you to go to bed before this escalates into a full-blown argument. We can discuss this further when emotions have settled." Susan's senses heightened as she heard the door slam shut, sending a chill down her spine. A wave of caution washed over her, reminding her of the need to tread carefully around Sandra. As she made her way towards the room, she unexpectedly came face to face with Sandra, who greeted her with a wide smile. "Susan, could you please get me a drink? A cup of hot tea would be perfect." "I always enjoy a cup of tea before bed," Sandra requested. Susan hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering towards the door of her own bedroom. She nodded in acquiescence, responding, "Certainly, I'll have it ready for you in 10 minutes. True to her word, Susan prepared a cup of tea for Sandra and then retreated to her own bedroom. However, upon returning, Susan experienced a moment of uncertainty. She typically kept her door closed at all times, but now, in that moment, she couldn't recall if she had left it open or if it had been open before. Glancing around the room, Susan found everything in its rightful place, yet a lingering unease remained. Recognizing the peculiarity of the day, she shrugged off her concerns and settled into bed, ready to let the strange events of the day fade away in the embrace of sleep. Susan harbored no anger towards Sandra, recognizing her youthful nature and understanding the complexities of relationships. However, Susan's empathy extended beyond mere understanding. It stemmed from her own personal experiences. As an attractive woman, Susan had often faced challenges due to her external appearance. While others might have envied her, for Susan, it had been a source of insecurity. During her youth, Susan had encountered situations where people were more interested in her physical beauty than in her ideas and thoughts. This constant objectification had caused her frustration and hurt as she longed for deeper connections and genuine understanding. She recognized that Sandra's actions and judgments were not solely rooted in malice, but were rather influenced by her own insecurities and experiences. Susan tossed and turned in bed, her mind racing with a flurry of thoughts that refused to subside. Sleep eluded her as the weight of the day's events and the swirling emotions within her kept her mind in a state of restlessness. Frustrated by her inability to find rest, she finally decided to seek solace in the cool night air. Quietly slipping out onto the patio, Susan breathed in a crisp night breeze, hoping that the gentle touch of the wind on her face would help calm her restless thoughts. The moon cast a soft glow, illuminating the surroundings and providing a serene backdrop for her contemplation. With each breath, Susan allowed the fresh air to wash away the heaviness in her chest, finding a sense of peace and clarity in the stillness of the night. As Susan prepared to retreat back to her bedroom, she caught a glimpse of a faint beam of flashlight emanating from Andrew's study. She questioned the need for a flashlight instead of simply switching on the lights. Aware that Andrew himself was not the one using it, Susan's instincts urged her to investigate further. With cautious steps, she made her way back inside the house, navigating the dark hallway with a sense of intrigue mingled with caution. The hallway remained dimly lit, providing enough cover for Susan to observe without being noticed. In the shadows, a figure materialized, moving stealthily from the study towards the room where Stefan and Sandra were staying. A shiver ran down Susan's spine as she realized something was amiss. An air of secrecy and uncertainty hung in the air, fueling her curiosity and concern. As Susan focused on preparing lunch in the kitchen, the tranquility of the morning was abruptly shattered by the sudden intrusion of chaos. Sandra burst into the room, her face contorted with anger and frustration. Andrew followed closely behind, his expression a mixture of concern and urgency. "Dad, you know that I wouldn't have taken it, let alone Stefan. There isn't anyone else except her." Sandra's voice carried a mix of frustration and despair, emphasizing the gravity of the situation. Her words seemed to imply that Susan was somehow involved or responsible for the predicament at hand. Andrew, his eyes filled with desperation, turned to look at Susan, seeking some sort of resolution or guidance in the midst of the chaos. His gaze conveyed a plea for understanding, a silent request for Susan to shed light on the situation and offer a path forward. Susan's heart skipped a beat as she heard Andrew's request for her to accompany him to her own bedroom. A sense of unease washed over her, and she fought to control the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Susan responded with a measured tone. "Okay, sure." She followed Andrew, her steps guided by a mix of curiosity and trepidation as they made their way towards her bedroom, uncertain of what they would find inside. As Andrew cautiously entered, his movements were hesitant and lacking in conviction. It was evident that he wasn't fully committed to searching through Susan's personal belongings. He feigned an attempt to rummage through the drawers and closet, his actions merely a facade. Perhaps he was seeking confirmation rather than concrete evidence. Suddenly, Sandra's voice pierced through the halls, loud and filled with accusation. Her voice echoed the sentiment that someone from outside couldn't possibly have stolen the key, insinuating that someone within her midst was responsible. Susan's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Her heart ached as the accusation indirectly targeted her. As Sandra entered Susan's room, a wave of contempt laced her voice as she addressed her father. "Did you search everywhere, Dad?" Her tone dripped with accusation, insinuating that Andrew hadn't been thorough enough in his search. Andrew, though hesitant, affirmed his efforts. "Yeah, I did." Silently, Sandra began her own inspection, meticulously combing through Susan's belongings. She left no stone unturned, peering into drawers, examining the closet, and even checking under the bed and behind the shelves. Then Sandra's attention was drawn to Susan's purse, perched on a stand in the middle of the room. She pointed towards it, her voice filled with curiosity and accusation. "What's in that?" she questioned, her finger directed at Susan's purse. Susan, caught off guard by the sudden scrutiny, shrugged her shoulders. "There are my things, like a makeup kit, my phone. There are a lot of things," she responded, her voice tinged with confusion. Sandra stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she picked up the purse. With deliberate actions, she opened it, causing its contents to spill on the table. Among the items that fell out was a key. Sandra's shock was palpable as she recognized it. Gasping, she confronted Susan and Andrew with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. "That's my dad's keys to his safe. What is it doing in your purse?" Sandra's accusation hung heavy in the room, leaving Susan utterly bewildered and caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events. Sandra's slight smile and cryptic words only added to the mystery, leaving everyone present grappling with the revelation and its implications. With his expression twisted with a mixture of frustration and resignation, he addressed Susan with a sense of remorse in his voice. "Susan, I apologize. I understand that a simple apology is not sufficient to make up for the confusion and distress caused by the situation. Please don't go anywhere." Turning his attention towards Sandra, Andrew's tone grew stern. "Sandra, you're coming with me." Sandra, seemingly incredulous, protested vehemently. "Dad, what are you talking about? Why are you apologizing to the thief? I told you she manipulated you, got you obsessed with her, all to carry out her plans." You listened patiently, absorbing her words without interruption. However, as Sandra's questioning came to an end, Andrew's response held a hint of sadness and disappointment. "Sandra, my dear, I know it was you who planted the key in Susan's purse. I cannot explain how I know, but the truth has become clear to me." Sandra's face fell, a mixture of shock, guilt, and shame washing over her features. The weight of her actions wore down upon her, leaving her feeling lost and exposed. She had never anticipated that her father would uncover her deceit, and the realization now consumed her with a deep sense of shame. "Despite everything, please understand that my love for you is unwavering. I would do anything to make you happy." He paused, steeling himself for the difficult revelation he was about to make. His voice, though tinged with sadness, remained steady. "There is something else I need to share with you, and I understand that it won't be easy for you to hear." Andrew's gaze locked with Sandra's, conveying both love and the weight of a difficult truth that was about to be revealed. "Sandra, sweetheart, it's ironic, but you have unknowingly prevented a great theft." Sandra frowned in confusion. "Have you ever told Stefan about what I do for a living?" Dad, he's my boyfriend and a future fiancé. Of course I share about my family with him. That's when everything clicked for Andrew. He told her daughter about Stefan, who was sneaking around in her father's study late at night that day, thinking everybody was asleep. He was looking for the keys to the safe. The safe contained important papers that some people were ready to pay a large sum for. As Andrew talked, Sandra had flashbacks to every time Stefan asked her specific questions. What slowly dawned on her? Sandra was getting mad at herself and at her boyfriend. She wanted to confront him, and as she turned to go and see him face to face, Andrew stopped her. He's on his flight back to Portugal right now. He left a fake note for you on the table. I hope you won't fall for that. But Sandra was adamant. She picked up her phone and stormed out. 2 hours later, the door screeched open. Sandra burst into the room, her tears-streaked face revealing the pain and regret that had consumed her. Andrew, visibly concerned, immediately turned his attention to his distraught daughter. "Sandra, are you okay, honey?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of worry and empathy. Amidst her sobs, Sandra managed to speak between gasps for breath. "Dad, you were right. He was indeed a scammer. He didn't even talk to me. He just left." It was clear that the reality of her situation had come crashing down upon her, leaving her feeling vulnerable and alone. "Hey, it's okay, baby girl." Andrew hugged and comforted his daughter. "If it wasn't for Susan, who saw everything and informed me on time, I don't know if you'd ever find out the truth about him." Sandra turned to Susan, her eyes filled with remorse. "I'm really sorry." Susan's smile was genuine, her forgiveness immediate. How could she hold on to any grudges when Andrew's hand was subtly squeezing hers, a silent gesture of support and unity? In that moment, Susan realized the power of compassion and the strength that could be found in forgiveness. She reached out her other hand to gently touch Sandra's arm. "It's okay, Sandra," Susan said, her voice filled with warmth and understanding. "We all make mistakes. What matters now is that you've learned from this experience. We're here for you." Andrew's reassuring presence, coupled with Susan's forgiving nature, created a sense of solace and unity within the room. As Sandra's tears continued to flow, a glimmer of hope emerged amidst the pain as the family started the process of healing and rebuilding their bonds, stronger than ever before.